Check one.
Hello. How's everybody feeling this evening? I mean, we've got wine, we've got truffles, we've got stories, so I'm really happy everyone's here. So I want to start off by talking about why the theme art. Art is present in everything. It provides a unique way to express ourselves, transcending other forms of communication. Art can ignite crucial conversations or serve as a reflection of our past, aiming to educate the future. It can also be appreciated for its pure beauty and aesthetics. My name is Meridith Grundei, and I am the producer and curator of tonight's event. I would like to thank the founders of Speak, George, Fred, and Jason, standing there in the back. And I would like to thank them for their commitment to share more stories and ideas with the world. I would like to thank our beautiful musician this evening, David Galvez. And our talented photographer and my dear friend, Danny Bristol of Bristol Photography. And lastly, I would like to thank our sponsors. The best Ethiopian food you have ever eaten in Washington Heights, Addis Ababa. And then I would like to thank the other sponsor for this evening's event, Epic Fit, a network who connects visionaries, entrepreneurs worldwide to serve humanity. As each speaker takes the spotlight tonight, you'll experience each talk like a piece of art, unique and personal, just as in a gallery or after a powerful performance. There's value in sitting with what you've heard, letting it resonate without immediate explanation or transition. There will be no intermission, and the running order is about 90 minutes in length. There will also be no introductions between the speakers, because I want to give you the space to absorb each talk in your own way, allowing time for reflection. We begin.
What I remember most is the smell. I'll never forget it. It was a combination of campfire, caramel corn, and melted plastic and electrical wire. We drove along the snowy gravel road through the woods up to our driveway in our sage green station wagon, the kind with the wood panels on the side. I was 5 years old. The only thing left of our home was a pile of black sticks strewn willy-nilly in a huge heap. I don't remember how long it had been since the night of the fire and the day we went back, maybe, a day or two, long enough that we'd found some clothes to wear and some shoes, likely donated by a local church. The night of the fire, we'd been awoken in the middle of the night, wee hours, with choking black smoke and flames coming out of the tops of the doorways. We barely got out, so all we had to wear was what we had escaped in, and in my case, a thin cotton nightgown. And we ran through the woods, barefoot, to the nearest neighbor, which was not so close. But now, the embers had cooled enough that we could walk through the rubble, and we tiptoed around black shapes and ashen beams that were leaning against what was left of the walls. My mother found where her bedroom had been, and she sifted through the ashes to see if she could find any of her jewelry. All she saw really as puddles of little melted metal parts. The house was all on one level, and my sister and I went to where our bedroom had been. We found our dog, Grendel. She was laying in the middle of a black, empty frame where a mattress had been. In fear, she'd run under the bed and become trapped. And there she was, this black, sleeping shape, unmistakably her. She was a Weimaraner, sweet, silver, elegant dog with the long snout and the long, floppy ears. It's a breed also referred to as the gray ghost. I crouched down and I reached in and I pulled out one of her charred ribs, and I took it back to the station wagon and I wrapped it in a McDonald's napkin to take home. We'd lost everything that night. We had to start all over. We ended up in a small, depressing, empty apartment. My mother went through a really deep depression. She barely got out of bed. My grandmother from Appalachia, North Carolina, came to visit, and she brought her sewing machine and some quilts that she'd made. My mother nailed them to her bedroom windows to keep every bit of light out. I don't remember my grandmother ever teaching me to sew, but I would watch her as she hunched over her sewing machine, and she would periodically spit tobacco juice in her Campbell soup can. I don't know, one day I must have picked up a needle and thread and I gathered some of the scraps from around her feet and I cut out some shapes and I just figured out how to sew together little figures. Back then I stuffed them with toilet paper. Oh, and I had a basket and I'd collect any little thing that was shiny or like a button, beads, any types of fabrics that were especially comforting. I especially loved my mother's pantyhose. They were feminine, delicate, but strong and flexible, and they smelled like her perfume. And they made the perfect skin for my dolls. Everyone had known my mother as vivacious and elegant. She had a wit. She had a naughty sense of humor, but men and women loved her just the same. But she kind of disappeared. But these stockings were like proof of her in the before times. I had terrible panic attacks. I could barely get to school. I'd have to push myself against the frame of the doorway, and they'd push me in, and I'd be kicking and crying. One time I was so distraught trying to get away that I lost my balance and fell butt first into the waste paper basket and got stuck. Everybody laughed. I hated school. But when I'd get home, I had my basket. And I would sit in the floor, cross-legged, making my little figures. And I felt like I'd accomplished something. I felt a sense of pride. I made little figures of my mother dancing with a sequin smile. I made little figures that looked like happy families. I carved figures out of sticks. I made dolls out of dried apples for heads. I was alone a lot, but I never felt alone because these little scrappy figures were like my companions. It's like they were witness to all that was unspoken. And I think most of all, when I showed my mother, she laughed. There is a much debated question in the art world: what is art? Well, it's almost an impossible question to answer because there's so many factors to consider. A more interesting question, maybe a more useful question, is what is art for? Throughout history, across cultures, art has been for so many things. Record keeping as a way to commemorate important people and events, as a way to signal status and wealth, as protest, as propaganda. But if you ask an artist what is art for, it's a much more complex and personal question. The artist Louise Bourgeois said art is a guarantee of sanity. That's been true for me. Imagine, if you will, you're walking through a museum And all around the gallery is art by famous artists, household names. And as you walk through, you zero in on one particular piece and you make some general observations. Is it uplifting or is it more somber? Is it brightly colored or is it more subdued? If it's a painting, you might make a note of the frame. Is it simple? Is it ornate? This might give you some indication of the time period in which it was made. Are there people crowded around it? This might influence you. Maybe they're taking pictures. Maybe you take a picture yourself. If you're really inspired, you might get up close and look at the detail. But then you'll probably scan the wall label quickly and then move on because there's so many things to see. What if the next time you went to a museum, you looked at a piece and asked yourself, what could this have been for? Did you know that the art of many famous artists, their medium, their subject matter, what you might call style, was developed in response to circumstances that they were going through, maybe difficult circumstances, things in their personal lives, or maybe things within the context of the time period they were going through, and that the art making was a way for them to process those difficult circumstances, which means that the art making was the way they processed, and the work itself is a record of that journey, a once-in-a-lifetime moment. For example, Picasso's famous Blue Period was a response to the death of his best friend. Claude Monet's style of fuzzy painting, light and shadow, was as a result of terrible eyesight. He had cataracts. And so it turns out his handicap is partly responsible for one of the most influential art movements of the 20th century, Impressionism. So art making all the way from cave paintings to present day has been one of the single most important things that the human race has had in helping us navigate change. I've come a long way since those days sitting on the floor making those little dolls. I've transitioned from careers in theater and dance. Once, during a production of West Side Story, I broke my ankle on stage in Scotland. They sent me home to recuperate. And while I was there, I instinctually started sewing again. And it became clear to me this relationship between mending and mending the body, mind, heart, spirit. I eventually devoted myself full-time to fine art. I'm now a contemporary artist. I make figurative sculptures that are very reminiscent of dolls. I've shown my work in museums and galleries, and it's collected all over the world. But they're not baby dolls, they're not fashion dolls, they're definitely not playthings. They've been described as confrontational, confidently bold, erotic, grotesque. I use vintage textiles, found objects, and sometimes even bone. Last year, I opened my own art gallery, and I founded the Doll Magic Academy of Figurative Sculpture, and I teach others to use doll making as a tool for self-transformation and healing. I've witnessed profound psychic healing in people, men and women, processing grief, illness, loneliness. Take, for example, a student of mine, I'll call her Susan. She came to my class after a long period of isolation following the pandemic. She was looking for connection, something unique and fun to do, and she was also struggling with her relationship with alcohol. But during the course of this class, she gave herself the gift of putting all of her usual distractions aside. She became more acquainted with her sense of play, her sense of spontaneity, her ability to feel free. She found her seat of intuition. She also fostered a supportive group of friends within the group. Or Maggie, who came to my class after a diagnosis of cancer, and instead of burying her fear or putting it aside, she created a self-portrait blooming with vitality and health. Because as we make, we become. And when we work with our hands, it's meditative, much like prayer beads. It opens up our ability to be receptive to possibility, maybe even the divine. I can't tell you what art is with any certainty, but if you asked me what is art for, I would say that art is a language available to anyone to help transform fear and confusion into something beautiful, to help us see the sublime in the mundane, and to gently guide ourselves through the chapters of our lives. Because how we make sense of a confusing world is the difference between a happy and an unhappy life. And having a creative outlet is one of the most healing, proactive things we can do for ourselves and the world. Because what we make, we become. Thank you.
As early as I could remember, I loved to bake. I was always on the tiny side, so I would climb up on a chair and I would get a big bowl, hand mix the sugar into butter, add in a little vanilla, add in the eggs, sift in the dry ingredients, and then add in chocolate chips. Chocolate chip cookies were my favorite thing to make. And it was my way of having my own little quiet time. Growing up in a crowded New York City apartment, it was my little escape, my little getaway. And when the oven timer went off, I would run and just indulge in those perfect chocolate chip cookies. As I got a little older, I got to travel, and I went to France, where my mom grew up in Paris. And I was so impressed with how they presented and the care and intent they had for cookies and cakes and candies, these little colorful bonbons, the different textures and looks. I was in love. So when I got back home, some time went by, and I said, what if I evolve some of this baking into chocolates, take on a little bit of a challenge? So fast forward to college, I was a little more concerned with paying off student loans than necessarily following a passion. So I majored in business, got a really great job at Macy's, helped them create their private label brands, and I would often go overseas. I'd go to Asia, North Africa, and I'd go to these factories, I'd source materials, I'd source accessories, but what I always loved was going out to these beautiful dinners with my vendors and experiencing new spices and flavors and foods. And as I evolved in my career, I got to go to Europe too and oversee trend, and again, getting all of these new ideas for food. And I would often come home instinctually and come up with a new chocolate recipe, or come up with a new cookie recipe using a new spice that I found out about. I would even bake for my buyers, and I realized that when I would bake for them, they would spend more money. So I was like, okay, I've figured out what to do here. I'm making money, I'm still, making chocolates and cookies, I'm happy. Except one morning I woke up with some really intense anxiety, and I was getting ready, I was in the front of the mirror, and I just kept telling myself, no matter what happens, you're fabulous. And I was like, what is gonna happen? Why am I saying this? So to keep up with the fabulous vibe, I put on some of my favorite clothes, my best black blazer, black pencil skirt, my Dior pumps, and I went into work only to find out that my job was eliminated. And I was crushed. And I had a corner office, and it just took so long to go from my boss's office to my office. After getting laid off, it's kind of like a walk of shame. You have to go all that long way. So needless to say, I needed some time to kind of recoup, and I decided, what if I build my own brand, but instead of doing clothing, I do chocolate, and I take all these like brand building experience that I have. So that's what I did. I used my severance, and I jumped right into being an entrepreneur, and it was so hard. I imagined that it was like just a recipe, just follow these steps and everything will work out. It does not work out that way. So I had to surround myself with like a community of other crazy people that decided they wanted to have their own business. And I found a little more solace working with other women. I learned early on that women entrepreneurs have a lot higher chance of failing than men. So when I found Jessica from Cheese Grotto, she was the founder, we decided, let's take cheese and chocolate and do pairings. Two things that are like fabulous, but you don't see a lot. And we went so far as like to put the cheese on top of the chocolate. Like forget the cracker, just cheese on top of the chocolate. So like picture a Sicilian salted lemon bar, chocolate, and then we'd put goat cheese on it. And when you would take a bite, the lemon would just burst with flavor, become so much more vibrant. The goat cheese would be extra creamy. Sometimes we'd be a little daring and contrast ingredients a little bit. Like we'd take a rosemary chocolate bar and a blue cheese, two very, very strong flavors. But when you put them together, they balance each other out. It's like they're doing this beautiful dance together. We even went so far as to take cheese and put it into chocolate. I can be a little crazy. So instead of butter, right, your classic truffle recipe, chocolate, cream, butter, I did chocolate, cream, cheese. I did raclette cheese, and we would emulsify it into the cream, and it was wonderful. Forbes even called it like the next best chocolate. They wrote us up about it. So I was like, okay, what else can I do? Chocolate and wine, that's a classic that I went after. But chocolate and spirits, I didn't realize how well those two things went together until Virginia Distillery, another women-owned business, approached me, and we decided to do whiskey-infused chocolates. But instead of just adding in the whiskey, we really dove into the notes that are in each whiskeys that they made. So they had like a cuvee cask whiskey. So I would add that into the chocolate, but then I would also add in raspberry. So if you take a bite of the chocolate and then you take a sip of the whiskey, you'd get those berry notes. It's almost would train your palate to pick up what was next. And it also took a little bit of the bite off a whiskey. Let's just be honest, whiskey can be strong. So during one of the pairings, there was a guest that was like, this is like heaven on earth. And at that moment, I took a step back and I was like, chocolate can create so much happiness, not just for me, but for everyone who indulges. Thank you.
Imagine I place this guitar in your hands right now where you're sitting, and you don't even know how to hold this thing. You don't, let alone play anything on it. But in 10 minutes, you're strumming your very first chords, and you're playing a beautiful piece of music as a group. Would you be amazed that you could achieve all that in such a short amount of time? Ah, good. Well, the one thing about music learning that is not a doubt is that it has the power to unleash our greatest potential. I didn't know anything about that power. I thought guitar was something you did in order to just be cool and get all the chicks. That's what I thought, at least I guess I was wrong. But before that, I actually hated this thing. I hated the guitar. My mother at age 11 forced me to go to this group guitar class in Harlem to make sure I was doing something productive and staying off the streets of Washington Heights, Manhattan, born and raised. So, I hated the class. My friends were listening to hip hop, R&B. I didn't hear guitar in those songs at those times, I don't know. But I just wanted to be cool like them, and guitar was not the cool thing to do. So eventually, after a year of inconsistent teachers and swinging this guitar on like a lightsaber with one of my, who is now like my brother, Rafi, who's not here today, I told my mother, no more. We're not doing this guitar no more. But then, one day I heard a song on the radio, and it goes a little something like this. I took a walk around the world to ease my troubled mind. I left my body lying somewhere in the sands of time. I watched the world float to the dark side of the moon. I guess there's nothing I can do. I don't know if you know that song, but that's Three Doors Down, Kryptonite, when it first came out. And I heard it on the radio because my brother was always an avid listener of different genres of music, and he always had the radio on. So I was like, oh, this song is pretty cool. And I was like, oh, this song has a guitar in it. And I said, oh, crap, I got a guitar. So I grabbed the old thing, dusted it off, and then I was there. I was like, okay, cool, now we're gonna play. And I'm playing along with the song as best as I can. And when I did it, I locked in that one note right there, and that changed everything for me. Everything. Just so you know, guitarists, it's the D note on the B minor chord, so if you know, you know. So I decided to go back to the guitar class. And at that point, I met my teacher, Alonso Perez, who was actually the most consistent, stayed with us amidst all the chaos that was going on in the class, and also he saw something in me that I didn't. And so he taught me my very first chords, he taught me the basics of reading music, and little tips and tricks to sound cool just like him. And so, fast forward a little bit, I auditioned for LaGuardia High School of the Arts, and I got in for violin, even though I went for guitar. So I had to self-teach myself for the next 4 years, anything on the guitar, which was pretty much all the heavy metal and rock that was introduced to me by my social group at that time. So, by the way, I'm leaving out a very important part of the story. I was highly undisciplined, and I was a terrible student in school, so I have no idea how I graduated high school, and sometimes I wonder how the hell I graduated college. So speaking about college, that's when the next phase happened in my life and my journey. My orchestra teacher at the time, Joseph Myers, he goes, hey man, so what are you gonna do for college? And I said, I'm gonna do guitar. And he's like, cool. I don't think there's a university for heavy metal and rock guitar unless you go to Berkeley, but that's gonna cost you a pretty penny. And I said, well, I guess I'm screwed then. God, always. So at that moment, he said, well, hold up a second. There is this thing called classical guitar. You should look into it. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't know what the hell that is. I was never exposed to it. Nobody talked about it. And this type of guitar is prominent in our Latin culture, in our Latin music. And I never got exposed to it because in my family, my household, music was just a hobby. You don't take it serious, you don't focus on it. So in my curiosity, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna be a rock star anyway. So let me do the rock star thing, but also find a safe path to have a safety net, right? So I decided I'm gonna be a music teacher so I could teach all day and then play rock and roll at night. So I went back to the class and I asked Alonso, I was like, hey, do you know anything about this classical guitar thing? He's like, I'm not a classical guitarist, but I'll teach you what I know. So he did. And at that moment, we ended up going, I was following my ex-girlfriend at the time, or my former girlfriend, and we ended up going to CW Post, auditioning there. Now, mind you, I didn't have one of these yet still. I was still on an electric guitar. So I had a heavy metal guitar, all weirdly shaped, a BC Rich Mockingbird with an amplifier, and I'm standing in line in CW Post over here, and all the other students are looking at me like, all weird. They're like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm here to audition for guitar. They're like, are you sure you're in the right place? Now I get why they said that. They all had their nylon strings, their footrest and their sheet music with them, and I didn't. I guess I didn't get the memo again. So somehow I got in, but here is where my undisciplined self comes in. So I get into college, and I do the bare minimum to do my lessons, and I'm slacking off in school, I'm partying, late nights, no early mornings. So long story short there, I pretty much did terrible in that school and ended up leaving because I found out that CW Post was a private school and still cost a pretty penny. But I didn't know anything at the time. So we ended up coming back to the city. I went to City College first semester, and guess what? They only have a jazz program. I'm like, I just started classical. I can't, what's going on here? So my brain exploded. I stayed there for a semester, and I ended up following my former girlfriend at the time again, saying, she's like, let's go to SUNY Fredonia, audition there, and SUNY Potsdam, Craner School of Music. So I said, okay, fine, whatever. And I did it, I auditioned, and I got denied from both. Great. So I get a phone call from the SUNY Fredonia distinguished guitar professor of classical guitar studies, James Perkowski, remember the name. He calls me, he tells me in my best gym voice, hey, Hazel, just giving you a phone call because I know you were probably denied. And in my head, I'm like, thanks for rubbing it in. He's like, no, but I just wanted to call you to let you know that I reversed that decision and you're in. So where did I go? I went to SUNY Fredonia. My former girlfriend went to Potsdam. You know how that ended. Anyway, so as I'm in Fredonia, James Pierkowski, the name I asked you to remember, imagine a cool, calm, collected, wiser older gentleman who had an aura about him, who always found a way to inspire you. And he always had a way of teaching that was so nurturing. And he always found ways to tie life into metaphors, into analogies, quotes from people, always found ways to show you how to overcome and achieve success in your problems, right? Musically or in your own personal life. And he made sure that you understood how to do that. But my undisciplined ass, dumbass as well, I just continued doing the bare minimum. I just continued to slack off and party. So guess what? Jim gave me a warning. He said, get your shit together or you're out. So I got it together for about 2 weeks, then went right back to the same old habits. Then I went back to Fredonia the next year. And guess what? Nothing changed. I was still being my same old undisciplined self, partying and doing all that. Now this time, as I'm going into my private guitar lesson with Jim, he goes and he tells me to sit down. Now normally, a guitar lesson with Jim, you just go in, you sit down on your bench, you take out your guitar, and you start tuning up and warming up so that way you can prepare, right? Normal stuff. He tells me not to take my guitar out. And I said, okay, something is up here. So at this moment, Jim closes the door slowly behind him, sits on the bench right across from me, and he looks me in the eye and he says, Hazel, music is not something that you just do. Music is something that you embody, something you eat, something that you breathe, something that you sleep, something that you digest. Music is a lifestyle. And I don't think you're about that life. So I strongly recommend that you change your major. At that moment, my heart sank to the pits of my stomach. We all know that feeling. And my brain started racing. And I started thinking about all the other things that I may be good at. And I'm like, man, I suck at science, I suck at math, I suck at history, I suck at English, all that stuff. And I'm not passionate about it. The only thing I'm good at is guitar. So after getting booted out of my lesson, and then soaking in my grief, and I was drinking some beers and some whiskey, rock and roll style, I had my epiphany and I asked myself, why am I not putting my all into something that I love? And at that moment, I decided to flip the script. I started putting my work into learning guitar and music. And once I did that, all the doors opened for me. I got into the top quartet, the Fredonia Guitar Quartet, which is like the school's golden ensemble that represents them. And we ended up playing a tribute concert to Roland Diaz, who at the time was, rest in peace, one of the top performers, classical guitar arrangers and composers. And we did a tribute concert to him. He was in the audience just like you. And then he loved the performance so much, he gave us a standing ovation, wrote a piece dedicated to our guitar quartet, and then opened the doors to do a world premiere of that piece in Germany and France. Europe. Me, a young Latino boy from Washington Heights, never thought I would go and step foot across the pond in Europe. But music took me there. And when we were there, I'm telling you, we lived a rock star life. We were being driven around by Jim. And, we were posters plastered of us everywhere. We were shutting down restaurants. We were sightseeing, doing everything that rock stars do. And wow, what a feeling that was. And that changed everything for me. And at that moment, on the plane ride back, Jim hands me a napkin, one of the paper, airplane napkins with writing on it. And it said, "The FGQ rocked Europe. Why? Because you put in the hard work and it was met with opportunity." That is when the journey started in my head. I said, I have to bring this back to the students just like me in New York City, in public school systems, in Washington Heights, and present them with this opportunity about mindset. And that's what it was. Ultimately, it was the positive habits and mindset that helped us achieve this. And so I'm bringing this back to our students in New York City. I graduated Fredonia. I came back. I worked for the Department of Education. Didn't work out too well. Then I worked with some not-for-profits that I was introduced to. And I had a vision of how to teach the guitar and the guitar programming. I wanted it to be nurturing and all about mindset of positive habits, like James Perkowski taught me and saved my world with it. But they didn't see the vision, and they told me, "You're not gonna make a living off of this." And I said, "Well then, fuck you," because that pissed me off. And I walked out. So again, whiskey and beer in the mix with a good buddy of mine. I'm pissed off, I'm venting to him, and we're already inebriated. I'm like, "Man, these guys," he's like, "Why don't you just start your own, man? Screw it." And I'm like, "You know what? Hell yeah, let's do it, screw it." So we stumbled our way through the internet, and we found good old LegalZoom. And guess what? We incorporated something there. I didn't know what it was at the time. Woke up the next morning, and I said, "Oh shit, what the hell did we just do?" I just had a baby. And that baby was named Internal Creations. It was a nonprofit. Thank God it wasn't a real baby, because I would have been even more screwed at that time. And I didn't end up in jail, so that's a good thing. So me, a musician, I went to school to be a musician and an educator, not to be an entrepreneur, a business leader, or anything. But I became one. And I realized that because of the positive habits and the mindset and the life skills that I learned through learning my guitar in college and post-college, that's the reason why I'm able to lead an organization today. So after 10 years of the school of hard knocks, that's still whipping my ass, and I got a degree in that one, I'll tell you, I'm able to lead this organization 10 years in. And we are continuing to impact students all over New York City and now New York State, giving them the positive mindsets. Myself and these students didn't know how to navigate life. But now, with these mindsets, with the guitar training, with the outlook of life and how to overcome your challenges, students are getting into their dream colleges, they're leading organizations, and they're inspiring the next generation of young leaders. We are here and we are musically creating each other. We are Internal Creations, where the guitar will take you far. Thank you.
You're a lot prettier than he is.
Thank you. I have always loved art, but I was never blessed as an artist with any artistic ability whatsoever. I was lucky enough that I grew up in community theater. I loved that connection that you form with an audience, knowing that we are all laughing or crying or smiling or experiencing this thing together because of what's happening on stage. I just absolutely loved it. So I went to a performing arts high school. I was a theater major in college. This was my goal. And then I met my very first boyfriend. And I got swept away. I knew very quickly that I wanted a family with that man, and that this thing I was doing was probably not going to support that family. So I decided I'm going to become a physical therapist, which concerned and surprised my parents, because the two things I hated the most at that point in my life were science and exercise. So the irony is not lost on me. But I knew better, so I gave up my scholarship, I switched majors, transferred colleges, and I became a physical therapist. And I did marry that man. And we had 2 children and a dog and a house in suburbia. I mean, we had everything. But underneath all of it, there was violence at home. He would yell, he would threaten me, he would throw furniture, break things that belonged to me and our children. He would steal from me. He would embarrass me in front of my family, isolate me from my friends, and at night, he would take from my body whatever he wanted, regardless of what I wanted. And somehow, he convinced me it was all my fault. But I loved him, and I stayed. Until about 8 weeks after our second son was born, I discovered he had been hiding an addiction to heroin and cocaine. And that, to me, was the last thing. I could not do it anymore. I didn't want it in front of my children. And in December of 2017, I filed for divorce. And what happened after that was a horrible cycle of rehab and relapse and rehab and relapse and rehab and relapse that drew out our divorce until June of 2019, when it was all finalized and I got full custody of both boys. In 2021, he overdosed and died. That is the worst part of my story. Let's all take a deep breath, because if you don't need it, I do. Okay? Now we're gonna flash forward about a year, and I want everybody to close your eyes. I promise we're going to a happy place, okay? You are on a tropical island, resting in a hammock. You can hear the waves, but they are a safe distance. The sky is the brightest blue you have ever seen. The sun just beats warmly on your face, and the thing you hear the most is the palm trees above you going wish, 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 wish. Can we open our eyes? Everybody relaxed? Maybe? Yeah. Well, in that moment, I was having a massive anxiety attack. And as the tears just came streaming down my face and I struggled to control my own breathing, I realized it was time for me to aggressively pursue my own healing. So I started on medication, I went to therapy, and I learned about self-care, and that for me, this meant I had to take that little creative person I had shoved and start pulling her out of the box. Now, I had remarried since then, so jumping into rehearsals 4 or 5 nights a week was not an option. We now had 4 children between the 2 of us. So I did the next best thing, and I bought an adult paint-by-number set because I have no artistic talent whatsoever, but I can follow a good set of directions. So thanks to the numbers 1 through 24, I have this beautiful painting of a ballerina who sits behind me at my desk. And I danced for 10 years when I was younger, but I never got to the level that this woman is. She is up on point. She is in this beautiful red swaying costume with poised arms and grace and confidence. She is an artist. And I get lots of compliments on her when I'm in meetings because people see her behind my shoulder. And I'm quick to remind them, just slow your roll, she's a paint-by-number. I mess up stick figures. Let's just remember this. So as I started to really explore my own creativity, I discovered I wanted to tell my story because I didn't want people who have experienced something like me to feel alone. The isolation is where it holds its power. And as soon as we take that away, it's not so scary anymore. So I decided to try telling my story through stand-up comedy. Again, an odd choice. But, you know, I got to my first stand-up comedy class because I'm a class person. And I told the story of how I got into health policy. And the whole room just busted out laughing. And I immediately remembered how much I loved that connection with people. And I started to wonder to myself, I speak on health policy regularly. It's part of my job, and I'm known for making it funny and relatable. Does that make me... I eventually decided no. Telling funny stories about Medicare and penis pumps does not make you an artist. So then I started putting words and emotions down on the paper in fragments that I refer to as poetry. And I had the privilege of sharing them at an open mic to raise awareness on domestic violence. I started writing a one-person show, working on my memoir, and I returned to my great love of reading. And I eventually got to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, in which he says, the recovery from trauma involves the restoration of executive function, and with it, self-confidence and the capacity for playfulness and creativity. And it occurred to me that that is what I had been experiencing. Like, I am not Picasso, I am not Mozart or Alvin Ailey or Rembrandt. I am not some great talent that just shapes how you see the world. Or maybe I am. The spoken word is a very challenging medium, but I speak, and I am an artist. Thank you.
It's the year 2015, June 27th to be precise. I'm standing on stage in front of 22,000 plus people at the Civic Center in San Francisco. What's my job, you might ask? I'm the MC, the comedian of one of the most incredible experiences of my life. The crowd is going crazy. I tell a joke. They laugh in waves that ripple a mile deep and come back. I'm living my dream. And at the end of my performance, I had to do something to remember that moment. So I pulled my phone out. I put the camera on, selfie mode. And I took a picture to remember that moment. Because I was like, this might never happen again. But let me take you back 10 years where it all began, where the dream of becoming a professional stand-up comedian began for me. You see, I was a naval officer. In fact, I spent 14 years in the United States Navy. You're welcome. Thank you, those who clapped a little bit, a few of you. No, it's okay. You don't gotta clap, it's okay. I don't tell you that because I want your applause. I tell you that so that you know that as a black man, I can swim. You see, comedy has the power to transform, to connect, to help you excavate pain and suffering through your body and transform it into material that people laugh at. In turn, you all feel better, you feel connected. But for me, a young naval officer living in Japan, Yokosuka, domoarigatou gozaimasu, no shashimashite, I was selected to be my ship's anti-submarine warfare officer. And so I was sent from Yokosuka, Japan to Newport, Rhode Island for a 30-day training course. And while I was there, a young whippersnapper, I was like, I want to do all the things that I never got to do as an adult. Because you see, I went from the Marine Corps enlisted, 2 years in, ROTC scholarship, 4 years of college, working 40 hours a week. It was just work, hustle, hustle, hustle. And then I joined the Navy. I never had a chance to explore things. And so here I was in Newport, Rhode Island, in December 2005, in the dead of winter, and I saw that the cast of the Dave Chappelle Show was coming to Boston. Now, I don't know about you, but I used to love the Dave Chappelle Show. So I bought tickets in advance, and the day of the show, it was a blizzard. And we were ordered by the command not to leave the base under any circumstances. So you know what I did as an officer, someone who follows the rules, upholds the law. I drove my rental like I stole it. And there I was, driving up I-95, 5 hours ahead of the show, because I had to go. First of all, I spent $45 on this ticket. There's no way I'm letting that ticket go to waste. Now I get there all by myself, and they packed us in like sardines because this was a special occasion. And my undergrad's accounting with a minor in marketing, so I'm looking around the room, and I'm seeing the people pour in, and I'm realizing this is 800 plus people, $45 a head. 2 drink minimum plus food and drink. I'm like, you know what? 9 sold out shows, they just generated $1 million in a weekend telling jokes. This is a business? I gotta figure this out. So I watched the show, and what I realized is I came by myself, but I left with a whole bunch of friends. Everybody arm in arm. And I even got laid that night. That's when it dawned on me that there was a correlation between comedy and orgasms. So tonight, we're here to talk about one of the most important things in life, and that is, what is the ROI of LOL? And LOL is laughs, orgasms, and leadership. So it's gonna change the way you think about LOL from now on. Now here's the thing. Laughter and orgasms have a lot in common because they both induce this chemical in your brain called oxytocin. So when you laugh, especially when it's uncontrollable, when it's involuntary, the toxin's really, well, not toxin, it's the best medicine, as they say, right? It's released in your brain. It's the same chemical that you have when you're having sex. It's the same chemical that you have when you're holding your baby or breastfeeding. This chemical is universal. And so when you can induce that in audiences, whether it be for one joke or an entire set, you're bringing yourself closer to those individuals, which inevitably helps you be more successful in business. So let's talk about the ROI of LOL. Now fast forward about 4 years. I'm doing stand-up comedy, I'm still a naval officer, I'm leading people, but I'm leading with love and laughter. I don't advocate giving your coworkers orgasms. That's an HR violation. But you can make them laugh as often as you possibly can. And even if you don't think that you are funny, facilitate an environment where your colleagues, your subordinates, even your superiors feel confident being funny around you, because there's a study that was in the book, The Levity Effect. Over 1 million employees were surveyed. And in environments where they feel like they can be themselves and be humorous, less mishaps occur because people are more likely to speak up in environments where they feel connected with their friends. And so the ROI is in the billions for those organizations that do it right. Now, fast forward 2009, I'm a naval officer. I'm going to Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, getting my master's degree in systems engineering analysis. And so my only job is school. And so I've got time to just work on jokes and drive around the Bay Area doing comedy. And I was on an OkCupid date up in Oakland, California, with this beautiful teacher. And I was a lieutenant in the Navy driving a BMW 335i turbocharged, 2 twin tailpipes, feeling like the man. It was raining outside, so I got my umbrella and I was escorting her to the car. When I looked across the street and I said, "Why is there a line of people staying in the rain?" And she said, "Well, Dave Chappelle just got back from Africa." I was like, "Word? We gotta go see him." She goes, we can't, the tickets are expensive. I'm like, "Girl, how much are the tickets?" She goes, "They're $55. I was like, "Girl, I'm a lieutenant in the Navy. We're about to make it rain. Let's go." I got the tickets, I got the drinks, I got the food. Don't worry about nothing. I'm bringing us in. So because it was raining, we managed to get into the show because it was sold out before that. Now, before the show, because I'm a professional, I'm handing out my comedy business cards left and right to people, letting them know, "Hey, I'm a comedian, I'm a comedian, I'm a comedian." During the show, Dave Chappelle comes out at 10:35. I'll never forget that moment. He came out and everyone is screaming for like 5 minutes straight, just standing ovations, yelling. People are yelling the catchphrases from the show, "Rick James, bitch," and all of that stuff, right? Now, Dave Chappelle is expertly handling them for hours on end. We're 2 hours into the show. It's a little bit past midnight. My date, who's a teacher, had to go to work in the morning. She goes, "Jamar, I gotta go." So I kissed her on the cheek. "I'll see you later. Text me when you get home," because I'm not leaving. And I stayed. And then there was just two couples in the front to my left that kept yelling Rick James the whole night, and they were drunk. And so Dave Chappelle, they ain't gotta go home, but they gotta get out of here, right? And they got kicked out. Then there was a little blonde girl to my left who I had given a card to before the show, and she nudged me. Jamar, we should go take those 2 seats up front. I was like, girl, what's wrong with you? You trying to get us kicked out? But then I thought to myself, she could be my Michelle Pfeiffer. This could be Dangerous Minds. I said, you know what? You go first, I'll go behind you. So she started walking, and I tiptoed. She sat down, I sat down. Now I'm 8 feet away from Dave Chappelle. To my right, we're 10 minutes into this. The blonde girl nudges me again, this time from this side. And I go, what? She goes, you should give Dave Chappelle your business card so he knows you're a comedian. Maybe he'll take you on the road with him. And I'm like, oh, how naive is this girl? But I thought to myself, you know what? This could be a blindside moment. You know what? I took my comedy business card out. I put it face up on the stage. I slid it very cautiously. And I kid you not, 30 minutes into it, Dave Chappelle looks down and goes, whose card is this? He picks it up and he reads it aloud. Oh, it's your card, Jamar. Comedian, writer, singer, artist, handyman. The crowd goes crazy. Now, in that moment, you guys may not realize this, but in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, I just wrote a joke for Dave Chappelle. So technically, I can say I'm one of his writers, you know what I mean? That's what I'm thinking 4 years into my little comedy career. But Dave, he spent a couple minutes, he was riffing on me, and he said, Jamar, just judging off this card, you're gonna make $1 billion with it. I was like, you think so? He's like, yeah, just judging this card, I'm gonna forget you. And a year from now, I'm gonna be doing my laundry, and we go, Jamar. And then I'm gonna call you up. You know what the saddest part about the whole story is? I was like, what? He's like, it's still gonna be the same number. But you're gonna pick it up like, hello, this is Jamar's handyman service, how can I help you? And I was like, Dave, now he was just having fun with me, but in my mind, I'm like, Dave, I'm never giving up comedy at this point now. Yes, I might still be handy and be a handyman on the side, but I'm gonna do whatever it takes because you were the wind beneath my wings. So comedy has taken me all sorts of places all around the world. I've performed internationally. And after that moment in 2009, fast forward about, 6 years later, I got to perform for 20,000 people. And I was like, wow, this is the pinnacle. And the very next week from that particular moment, I was in another show a week later, and there was 7 people in the audience. And I was like, oh, this is what comedy is about. It's humbling. It takes you on ups and downs, highs and lows. But I truly believe that the skill set that you can develop when you pursue transforming your pain and suffering into power through humor, I believe is truly priceless. Now, I've seen Dave Chappelle since many times, got a chance to work with him in New York. I've worked at the Comedy Store with people like Bill Burr and Dane Cook. The list goes on. But I will tell you, it's when people come up to you at the end of a show and tell you that their day was going south, and for an hour, maybe 90 minutes, you got them to stop thinking about the pain and suffering that they went through. That's one of the most transformational things to me about the art form that is stand-up comedy. Now, I know we're kind of in a cancel culture right now, and what I say is, listen, there's a flavor for everyone. Make sure you do your research about who you're going to see so that you don't get any surprises, But ultimately, if we all develop our sense of humor, the impact to your bottom line, if you run a company, if you work for a company, is limitless. So I want to leave you with this. I see myself as an artist. The art of stand-up comedy is the art of communication, something that we're all capable of. And if you develop that art, it will help you become better as a partner, as a spouse, as a business partner. And so really it's an endless, I call it the infinite game. Most recently, I had a chance to MC an award ceremony for the Industrial Design Association that came to Austin, Texas, where I now live. And it was amazing to see hundreds of designers who make products, services, and packages be amazed that someone could actually be funny on stage. Because for the last 20 years, their awards were so boring that you could watch paint dry, and that would be more exciting. And so imagine how many boardrooms you can impact and change if you just are willing to take a risk. Dare to be funny. That vulnerability is your greatest superpower, and it will be your greatest super connection. Thank you.
Imagine you stepping into a traditional Japanese tea room. It's like entering into a small sacred universe where every detail has been carefully arranged. The room is serene. Soft tatami mats cover the floors. Shoji screen filtered in the natural light. And in the alcove, a simple scroll hangs with the words, "Peach blossoms never changed for 1,000 years, blooms with pure intent, heralding the arrival of spring." This then quote set the tone, reminding us of timeless beauty. Beside that, a vase holds pink cherry blossoms, adding the touch of nature's elegance. In the center of the room, the soft steam rises from the tea kettle. The gentle sound of boiling water, the wind in the pine trees, we Japanese call it, fill the space. Every item in the room, from tea bowl to water pitcher, has been chosen with care. The room inviting you to pause, be fully present, and just breathe. So, in our busy daily life, what if we could find the perfect moment of harmony, a moment where everything is in sync, a moment of peace and connection? I was born and raised in Japan and started learning tea ceremony 15 years ago when I'm here in the US. So my friends and family in Japan were surprised. Why now? Why in the US? They asked. The response is rather simple. In this noisy world, particularly here in the US, I felt the deep needs of harmonious, peaceful spaces. The peaceful moment in tea room has its name in Japanese, Ichiza Konryu. Translation, creating together in one setting. This Ichiza Konryu is the essence of Japanese tea ceremony. It means everyone and everything in the room, meaning every person, every item, and every action contribute to share the experiences. So tea ceremony is not just drinking tea. It is about creating the shared moment of harmony and connection, which every person played a role. Every item in the tea room is a work of art. The tea bowl, kettle, whisks, and bamboo scoops, each of them is handcrafted by artisans whose skill set has been passed along through generations for over 400 years. The calligraphy of the scroll is also a work of art done by Zen priest. But this Ichiza Konryu go beyond the beauty of the object or even traditional setting. So let me share with you the moment which has helped me to realize that. I was an MC at the Japanese tea ceremony demonstration at Japan Society. The event took place in a large auditorium, which is not quite the usual cozy tea room setting I imagined. 2 Japanese tea masters from Kyoto came to perform the ceremony, and this auditorium was filled with more than 100 people. So again, it's not intimate environment. As the performance began, the light dims and all eyes focus on the small stage. 2 tea masters moved very gracefully, their actions perfectly in sync. And then I noticed something unusual. The entire audience grew still. The usual background noise, rustling in the programs and shifting in the seat, disappeared. It was just like entire room breathing together, sharing in that sacredness of that moment. I was in awe, not just because of the tea masters, but because of that collective feeling in that auditorium. The audience and the performers come together, creating such a deep sense of connection. And it was just 10 minutes experience, but as people leave the auditorium, they express deep gratitude with calm smiles. In that large auditorium, I witnessed the power of Ichiza Konryu creating together in one sitting. Every individual has become part of something greater. Together, we created the art, not through the movement, but through the shared presence and intention. I realized then that tea ceremony isn't confined to the traditional setting, because it's about connection, and that can happen anywhere. And also, this experience taught me something important. It is not the rituals or forms of the tea ceremony that matter. It is the mindset. The guest brings curiosity and compassion, while the host offers generosity and openness, and together they created the environment of Ichiza Konryu, where co-creation in one sitting can happen. So I wonder, what if we approach each interaction in our daily life in that way? What if we treated every conversation, every meeting, as if an opportunity to co-create something beautiful? Imagine the impact that we could have if we brought that mindset of curiosity, compassion, generosity, and openness to every project and every meeting. And think about here, this event. We speakers here offering with the generosity our very personal stories and being open to any reaction from you. And you, the audience, are here listening with curiosity and compassion, and trying to understand the deep emotions and wisdom through those stories. So, as you leave here tonight, I ask you to carry with you a spirit of Ichiza Kondryu, creating together in one sitting. Remember, the most beautiful experiences often rise from the moment when we co-create with others. Like tea ceremony, those moments cannot be captured as a photograph. They only exist in the present as a testament to the power of the connection and collaboration. Thank you.
Transformation. It's a word that carries weight, invoking images of evolution, change, and sometimes survival. As a tattoo artist for over 30 years, transformation is a daily practice. My practice on others, right? But I'll tell you something, my most recent and most intense journey of transformation came from a place people don't usually associate with tattoos, the Riviera. When I first arrived at the Adriatic Riviera nation of Montenegro as the guest of a client, I was filled with the usual feelings of adventure and naivete. In New York, I had seen firsthand why there's more artists per square mile in the Hamptons than anywhere else in the country. Why? Proximity to high-value individuals, huh? Right? When I came to the beautiful Balkan coast and discovered that it was a third of the cost of the Hamptons, and even Monaco, secured my ambition to open a tattoo studio there. Now, I knew I had something to offer, but I was not prepared for how hard I would have to fight to be taken seriously. While I was familiar with the post-war economy's corruption culture, my first experience rubbing up against that underbelly was, to say the least, intense. One crazy night, I found myself in a position where I had to fight for respect the hard way. I got my ass kicked by a mafia guy. No joke. Now, that is an experience that would send most people packing, and rightly so. But for me, I saw it as a challenge. I saw this as survival, and as a point I wanted to make that I'm not just some foreigner trying to make a quick mark. So I did what I do best. I gathered up my portfolio. 30 years of my best work. Tattooing became my language, and with it, I reached out to these high-ranking mafia captains and gave them an offer they couldn't refuse. Yeah. That is high-quality, world-class craft that would wow the Eastern Bloc for life. So that began a journey of transformation. Within 3 years, I rotated back to the Balkans, not as an outsider, but as an entrepreneur under the protection of these powerful figures. This protection wasn't just a shield, it was a pathway to something much bigger. Eventually, I found myself in a position where, against all odds, my crew and I could pay off the bosses and legalize tattooing in Montenegro. Now, this victory was not just about the law. This was about changing the cultural narrative. You see, tattooing has deep roots in the Balkans, where for centuries, tattoos were used as marks of protection. During the Ottoman invasion, Christian women and children wore tattoos on their necks and their hands, sacred symbols inscribed to ward off abduction and rape by these invaders, superstitious invaders. So this art was not just about the tattoos, it was about identity and resistance and survival. Now, when Tito came into power, this legacy fell away due to persecution. But upon discovery and examination through my ink and blood splattered lens, ladies and gentlemen, I sought to reconnect Balkan identity with these ancient symbols, long buried, a language that could unite them in the modern diaspora with which they find themselves. This vision led to the Marks of Protection campaign, which is a body painting and photographic initiative that will make its debut at Art Basel Miami in December with Zurich-based Art Talk magazine. With this initiative, we reached out to UN charities like England's Madai Trust, who work with victims of modern human trafficking to cover the traumatic tattoos that pimps execute on their victims nowadays, covering these tattoos with symbols of joy and growth and renewal. So we not only use this to raise awareness of human trafficking now, this campaign funds human trafficking laws all around the world. So Marks of Protection wasn't just about the tattooing and the art. It taught me about how much tattoos have protected me. The art that shielded others for centuries now shielded me. For me, transformation is not just about change in the world, change in yourself. It's about holding your ground, using your art to empower and to protect and to transform for good. Thank you.
I want to tell y'all about my high school art teacher. She was this short, petite, super fit woman, and she used to wear these really tall, high heels to make her appear taller and bigger than she actually was. She had this bright red and blonde, fiery, curly hair, and a smile that was shaped like a heart. Now, I want to note here that I am not saying that her smile was shaped like a heart to endear you to her or to make her appear to be this warm and fuzzy character, because she wasn't. And that is further evidenced by the fact that whenever she would smile, her eyebrows would naturally scrunch in her forehead. So it had a way of making her look scary and definitely intimidating, especially to 14 to 18-year-olds. But I digress. My teacher with the heart-shaped smile and angry eyebrows was a complex character. I remember, especially in high school, I found it so difficult to wrap my head around somebody like her. Looking back, I realized that that's actually what made her such a phenomenal art teacher. But I don't know if it was my own perfectionism or my intense need for achievement, but I think the fact that I was so intimidated by her blinded me to a lot of the lessons that she was working to instill in us. But there's just something about a good teacher. Now that I'm an adult, I find myself picking back a lot of her isms and trying them on for size. Some of my favorites that I still use in my art practice today: make sure you put a little chocolate in your peanut butter and some peanut butter in your chocolate. Translation: every artist in their pieces and in their portfolio is striving for cohesion. And an easy way to achieve cohesion is through a little bit of repetition. So if you're using red on this side of your piece, repeat it over here. Draw your viewer's eye all the way around your piece. Another one. That looks great. Now destroy it. Translation. You've created, technically, a really beautiful piece of artwork, but it is boring to look at. Make it interesting. Cut up your canvas and put it back together. Smear paint over your subject. Make me want to look at it for a long period of time. And lastly, if you're gonna serve me shit, it had better be on a silver platter. Translation. You clearly didn't finish your assignment, and I can tell that you didn't finish your assignment, but I can also acknowledge that you came in here and you presented it with confidence, so I'm gonna give you some points for that. But tonight, I'd like to talk about what I think has become my favorite lesson of hers, especially now that I'm a full-time artist. It starts with something scary, something haunting. It starts with the art underneath the bed. My teacher with the heart-shaped smile was a very talented artist. She had actually won a full-ride printmaking scholarship for college, and she had a really strong relationship to the Las Vegas art scene. But despite all of this, she refused to create new work or to show her work publicly. And you know, we're high schoolers. She's teaching us art. All of us, we would pine to see her artwork. But whenever we asked about it, she would always respond with, listen, I put my art and all my supplies underneath my bed a long time ago. Haven't touched them since. Even repeating those words today, I still get a shiver up my spine. Because isn't there something particularly haunting about all of the artwork that you had created and all of the potential artwork that you could create being hushed up and stored away underneath the dark and lonely bed? I remember my classmates and I would always kind of hold that truth at about an arm's length distance. We didn't get it, and she also didn't really make it her business to give us the gift of understanding. But I'm gonna fast forward us to the last day of school because I think that this, in her weird way, was her way of doing that. So, last day of school, we're about to graduate. We're in the art room. Some of us are sitting on top of the tables. Some of us crisscross applesauce on the ground. And she's giving us her final goodbyes. And she says, today's the last day of school. You all are about to graduate. Yeah. You've had 4 years with me. I've taught you a lot. But honestly, if you take none of that with you, take this. It doesn't matter who's good. She paused. Yeah, it doesn't matter who's good. Actually, you're all good. You're all good artists. You've had 4 years of training to ensure that you're good technical artists. But that doesn't matter anymore. We sat with bated breath waiting for her to get to the point of her message, and she did. She said, what matters is who continues. Immediately, my brain went to the art underneath the bed. If I could sum up 17-year-old Ashley's thoughts, it would be something around fear and disappointment. Because how hypocritical! My art teacher, who had taught me everything about art making and is now giving me this advice to continue, didn't continue. And honestly, if I were giving this speech before you today as a 17-year-old, I would have been angsty. That probably would have been the end of the talk. How depressing. My art teacher didn't continue. She gave me this advice and then she didn't. So then in your artwork, make sure you continue. But I'm 27, it's been 10 years. I have a little bit of nuance. I've done some growing and reflecting. And I realized that I had actually taken that lesson completely the wrong way. The job of an artist is simply to create. Yes, artwork, but also to create opportunities and to build relationships and to invent new ways of seeing, to build new worlds. And all of that requires intense but beautiful periods of resting and reflecting and crying and creating and sometimes destroying. My teacher with the heart-shaped smile and angry eyebrows totally continued. She taught generation after generation of students how to decenter realism from our practices, how to inject a little bit of abstraction into our pieces, how to build cohesive portfolios. And most importantly, she, in her art practice, took pause. So now, standing in front of you today at 27, as a full-time artist, thank you, I can honestly say that that's the end of my story. As artists, we're rewarded when we create, but we all have art under our bed. Creation, though, needs to go beyond the canvas. So in these moments when our works need a bit of rest, that's totally okay. And even though we're going to give it that time to rest, we must never let our art be forgotten. Thank you.
I want to take you back to a time in the recent past when a somewhat awkward white guy with graying hair took the stage at a speaking event somewhere in midtown Manhattan. He seemed quite nervous, and the audience found themselves ever so slightly uncomfortable every time he would take a pause in the middle of a sentence. But trust me, I know the end of the story, and you don't need to worry. He appeared to be short of breath whenever he paused, but he kept going with his pre-written speech. The speech was entitled An Experiential and Experimental Treatise on the Power of Music and the Lack Thereof in Early 21st Century America. Confusingly, the speech seemed to have absolutely nothing to do with music. If anything, it had more to do with silence, or at least the cessation of sound coming from the person speaking. In the mid-20th century, the composer John Cage wrote a famous piece entitled 4 minutes and 33 seconds, in which a pianist sat at a piano on a concert stage, opened the piano lid, and proceeded to not play a single note for precisely 4 minutes and 33 seconds. People referred to 433 as the silent piece. John Cage later said they missed the point. There's no such thing as silence. What they thought was silence was actually full of accidental sounds. Now, the people gathered in Midtown on that particular cool September evening in the early 21st century could actually hear quite a lot of sound happening in the spaces between the words. Each time the speaker would pause, sounds like a ventilation system, laughter, people shifting in their seats could be heard. People would later report in the audience that they somehow felt more alive in those pauses. The attention was so focused. The speaker went on to tell a story. Actually, no, at that moment, the speaker went on to ask the audience to recall a time when music had an impact on their life. Maybe it was a time you fell in love to a movie soundtrack, he said, or a time you sang a song at the top of your lungs in your high school bedroom. Or maybe a time that music saved you. Then he paused again for the audience to connect with that memory, with that moment. I mean, after that, the talk kind of meandered. Honestly, as some talks do. The speaker told a story about how when he was 6 and he started taking organ lessons because he apparently was acting out in school, and about how he later transitioned to the piano and fell in love with the instrument, and about how in high school he discovered Billy Joel. Okay, setting aside any opinions you or I might have about Billy Joel or white guys or the 20th century, the audience was then kind of drawn in when the speaker got a little choked up when he told about the time when he was 16 and he played Piano Man for his dad. In the back room of their ranch-style house in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the late 20th century. And his dad cried tears of joy because his dad was proud of his son. And he was moved by the music. And the kind-hearted audience was also moved when the speaker shared that his father died just a few short months later. And as the audience settled into the rhythm of the speech pauses and all, a truly remarkable thing happened. In the next pause, an unexpected sound emanated not from the stage, but from the audience. The sound was the sound of a single person humming a sustained tone. As a matter of fact, if I'm recalling correctly, it was a few people. And it was breathtaking. This was truly remarkable because the people at the event that night in Midtown were not expecting to participate in the event in any way. And they certainly weren't expecting some random people to start humming tones. No sooner had the audience recovered from this surprise when another remarkable thing happened. A few people hummed in harmony, enjoying the sound. And there was a crescendo, as I recall. And then the strangest thing yet happened. There was a moment, a completely unrehearsed moment, in which the speaker said some lyrics, and look, I cannot overemphasize this to you. There was absolutely no rehearsal. There was no agreement, there was no discussion. But what happened on that remarkable evening in September, I offer to you here without explanation or apology. Okay, look, this room full of people had shared something together that night. And music was the only reasonable way to conclude this shared experience. They had shared discomfort, laughter, recollection of deep memories, a profound experience of listening in the present moment, courage in the face of the unexpected, maybe a quiet tear of joy, and yes, dare I say it, a deep connection to their fellow humans. And so, even though it was corny as shit to everybody gathered there that night, the speaker spoke some lyrics and someone sang, "It's a pretty good crowd for a Saturday."
It's a pretty good crowd for a Saturday.
And the manager gave them a smile. because he knows that it's me. They've been coming to see, to forget about life for a while. And a few more people joined in. And the piano, it sounds like a carnival. And the microphone smells like a beer. And they sit at the bar and put bread in my jaw and say, man, what are you doing here? La la la, oh la la la, da da da. That's it. La la, da da da. And every single person in the room that night sang, sing us a song, you're the piano man. Sing us the song tonight. Well, we're all in the mood for a melody, and you got us feeling all right. And that, my friends, he said, is the remarkable power of music. Do not miss it. Thank you.
Woo, another big round of applause, please. Now I would like to bring each speaker back on the stage so that we can properly introduce them and the titles of their stories, starting with Melissa Ichiuji. What is art for? Big round of applause. Melissa! Milene Jardine, more chocolate, please. A sweet tale about how chocolate is always the solution. Hazel Montez, unlocking your potential through guitar. Megan Henniger, Chapter 2. Jamar John Johnson, the ROI of LOL laughs, orgasms, and leadership. Shoko Mazuda, the art of co-creation, a lesson from Japanese tea ceremony. Friday Jones, mark of protection, weaponized ink. Ashley Fluellen, the art under the bed. And Gary Grundei, an experiential and experimental treatise on the power of music and the lack thereof in early 21st century America. Let's then give them an all big round of applause. Take a bow. Take another bow. And let us thank our tech crew tonight, Harper Grundei and Gwendolyn Harmson. Thank you, thank you. We are going to be all at Goldie's Tavern after this, which is 3 doors down at the Courtyard Marriott. I hope that we will see all of you there so that we can have further conversations about what art is for. Thank you. This has been Speak Art.